Hi everyone, and welcome to a special edition of a show that I hosted around a decade ago called You've Got to Have Art. My name is Jeff Stoodt, and the focus of this special is an upcoming weekend visit to Milton by Marek Bennett, an award-winning New Hampshire-based cartoonist, folk musician, and educator. Marek will be appearing at the Forbes House Museum on Saturday and Sunday, June 13th and 14th. On Saturday evening at 7, he'll present a concert of folk music from the American Civil War. In addition to the music, Marek will be presenting 19th century artwork and texts and reading selected historic excerpts. The following afternoon, Marek leads a workshop called Creating Comics from Local History. He'll demonstrate how he created his long-running graphic novel series, The Civil War Diary of Freeman Colby, based on primary source texts and artwork. Then, he'll invite attendees to create their own mini-comics and graphic novels based on historical comics, stories, and texts from the Forbes House Museum collections, or their own chosen themes. His appearance is another event in what has been a busy season at the Forbes House Museum. If you've never visited there, you should consider coming to see Marek. Both of his appearances are designed for both adults and families. I hope that you'll enjoy my interview with Marek. In it, he discusses his work, his educational mission, and his influences. Well, hello, Marek. Where exactly in New Hampshire do you live?
I am in Henniker.
Henniker. Can you help me? What major New Hampshire city is that near?
Well, if you go up the Merrimack River into New Hampshire and then up the Kentucky River back down towards Vermont, sort of, and Massachusetts, it's in that southwestern corner of New Hampshire.
Very good. Very good. Well, welcome to this special show we're doing for your appearance here in Milton. And I was looking over your website, and I saw the name Ed Emberley, which I was familiar with. I know that name. And Mark Kistler, I didn't know, though. You said that these are two cartoonists who inspired you to become one yourself. And so my question to you is, why did they light a spark in you?
Yeah, I think you must have seen that in the answer I gave to a student questionnaire about how I became an artist.
Yeah.
And it's a comic I drew to answer how I became an artist. Yeah, and I did mention those. Good. You did your deep research then. Ed Emberley was probably one of my first formative influences, besides the people in my life, the adults and kids in my life who also drew, who inspired me. That was my first inspiration, of course, sitting on my dad's knee and watching him as he just took a blank piece of paper and made some marks and made something start to appear on it,
Is he a professional or?
He was a contractor. He did blueprints and things, but he could draw a really cool X-Wing fighter, and I was into Star Wars, and he would say, "What do you want to draw?" And I'd pick a spaceship and he'd draw them. And and using perspective and doing more realistic sorts of drawings, that was inspiring to me. But I think Ed Emberley really was the first artist who showed me that you don't have to be really technically brilliant or technically accomplished. Ed Emberley's books are basically how-tos, step-by-step how-tos of how to make pictures out of very simple geometric shapes. Just circles, squares, squiggly lines, dots, and a couple other things that everybody can make. You make them by accident if you just move a pen over the paper. And his books showed me, yeah, if you take these very simple shapes and intentionally figure out how they work together, put two dots in a line inside a circle, and you'll have a face. It will come to life. And if the line is a little askew, it has expression. And that idea, just learning to work with simple shapes and finding that the imperfections and the mistakes you make are the most interesting part. That's where it comes alive and does something you didn't expect. That's really what made me a cartoonist, I think, as opposed to any other kind of artist. Because as a cartoonist, we work with simple materials. So it's a very accessible art form. I mean, I don't know how old I was when I started reading Ed Emberley's books and drawing in his style, but it must have been around age 5 or something. And I don't know if I could write my name or not. I couldn't read yet. But I knew there was such a thing as reading, and I knew people looked at books and got stories. And I knew if I took my sketchbook and made some of these marks and made some faces and showed them doing things, people could get stories from my sketchbook. So I knew about reading. I just couldn't write or read text, but I could read pictures. And that's something that I really try to instill when we do these classes and workshops is when you draw something and create an image, it's readable to a huge number of people, and they'll all see something a little different in it. And that's the fun of working together and trying to get these stories on paper. We need our readers, and our readers react differently to those stories. I think Ed Emberley really showed me that there's an infinite world in the simplest possible materials.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mark Kistler, you might not have maybe. I think I'm maybe a couple years younger than you. And Mark Kistler came out as a TV show in the 1980s on public television. It was called Secret City. And I was kind of at an age, I was probably in 6th grade or something. I don't remember exactly what year, but it was around that time. I was starting to get into middle school. I was starting to hit that point where none of my friends really wanted to draw anymore, or, some did, but a lot of them who used to draw had kind of decided, I'm not an artist. You're the artist. I'm not an artist. And they'd stop drawing. And it's a critical point where we're all artists up to, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And then we start specializing. And a lot of us decide we're not artists. So Mark Kistler's Secret City was just this super nerdy. I'm thinking of goofy and nerdy at the same time. Super nerdy, super goofy, sort of just drawing show. And Mark was in like a flight suit with magic markers and all these secret pockets. And he was just super enthusiastic. And he'd look at the camera and just be like, keep drawing, draw every day, draw, get a drawing frenzy on. And my brother and I would just kind of watch it and draw along with it. And I thought it was a little over the top, but it was so inspiring just to see an adult who reminded us, like, here's how you draw this, here's how you draw that. Let's try this. We don't know how to draw it. Let's try it. And that experimental attitude really inspires me. Looking back, I realize it was a real influence.
Yeah, so I remember years ago, and you remember too, because in my research, I saw that you remembered a time when growing up, comics were disregarded by librarians as educational tools. Now, of course, they're practically mainstreamed. What do you think brought about the change?
Oh, a lot of things. That's like a whole PhD thesis or two thing. But in my experience, it's partly age, that librarians and teachers, when I was a kid, have been educated in the 50s, 60s, 70s broadly. And comics occupied a very different place from, say, a teacher who's starting out now and is 20, 25, say 25 years old now and is starting out. All their life has been in this post-digital age comics world. All their life has been after. One thing I do remember as a kid, one summer, some friends of ours came to visit, and it must have been 1986 or 1987. And they brought a copy. They were from the city, and they brought a copy of Art Spiegelman's Mouse. And I was 11 years old. I knew nothing about the Holocaust or World War II history, except I really liked big airplanes and I liked drawing airplanes, but that was the extent of my knowledge of World War II. Um, and I read that book, and most of it went right over my head, but I read it at my level, and it was, nowadays some people might say, oh, it's too serious for 10 or 11 years old to read. But no, I read it at my level. I skipped over the parts I didn't understand. I read deeply in the parts that caught my attention. And I came out of it thinking, number one, knowing a few more things about the Holocaust and World War II. And number two, saying, like, oh, I remember consciously thinking, I had no idea comics could tell stories like this. I thought all comics were superhero stories
Right.
that were kind of vapid, and you always know the good guy is gonna win at the end, and it just goes on, and there's no real development. I've been reading Marvel comics for years, and I love Marvel comics, and I
Yeah.
loved it as a genre of comics, but the medium of comics, I think that books like that, what I'm saying is books like that in the mid 80s into the 90s started opening up people's minds, 11-year-old me and older readers too, about what comics could be. And then a generation or two after that, that's when today's 25-year-old teacher was born. So they were born into, say, a generation after that. They were born into a generation that grew up with that knowledge. And we've been building on that ever since, that comics are not just silly little books for kids. Um, and that they can be, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they can do so much more. And you look at the field now, and we have graphic novels in every bookstore, and ask any librarian what the highest circulating titles are. They're probably going to be graphic novels.
Mm.
They're probably going to be like graphic novels from other countries, like manga,
Mm.
that
Yeah.
weren't even available to us as kids.
Yeah.
As I know, in the library where I was growing up, great library, great librarian. I think the one comic book was a collection of Batman comics. And my friends and I would check it out over and over again and reread them because we just loved comics.
Yeah.
But the whole attitude of these well-meaning teachers and librarians was, we want kids reading real books. We don't want them reading this, mental garbage stuff. They'll do that on their own time. And to their, there were a couple reasons for that. To their credit, there weren't a lot of high quality comics available in the 1980s and 90s, widely available, like there are nowadays. There's also, this makes me think of this book. I had it here from a presentation recently, The 10-Cent Plague by David Hydu. And this is an amazing story about the censorship of the 1950s coming out of the comics culture of the 1930s and 40s. And it's very much a story of McCarthy era America.
Mhm.
And that's what really set the tone for the comics industry. And that's when a lot of older teachers, my older teachers, were educated as teachers in that culture of censorship and suspicion of comics. So it makes sense that all their careers, they have been told comics were bad for kids. Comics make kids juvenile delinquents. Of course, they're not going to jump into comics just because there's a couple quality comics in the 1980s, right?
Yeah.
But that revolution, the revolution in comics really, I think, goes back to that era where creators were starting to own their own copyrights, starting to make their own books that they really care about, starting to be able to, I guess they called it desktop publishing then, starting to be able to self-publish and print and distribute because changes in the industry made it so that they could get around that industry censorship. And here we are 20 or 30 years later. I mean, the publishing industry sees the value of comics, so they promote them. The librarians see the value of it, so they promote them. Schools hire me to come and teach comics and show teachers how to use comics in the classroom. And yeah, it is a really transformative medium to get into the hands of students.
I think that, I'm a retired teacher, and I know that with project-based learning, you offer kids options to show what they know at the end of the experience. And always doing a graphic book is one option they might choose, show what they know. So it really is kind of mainstreamed educationally right now also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and I think it's when I started teaching comics, I thought of it as like this is great for people who like to draw, and it's not harmful for people who don't
mm,
really care to draw or something. But I kind of thought of it as a medium that was focused on the artwork. Over time, I've come to see it as much more than that. That you don't that a project in the comics medium Uh, you can approach it as an illustration project. You can approach it as a drawing a book. You can also approach it in a lot of other ways because the core of the idea of the medium is when you juxtapose one image, let's call it, but it can have writing in it, and it can be any kind of image, photo, drawing, anything, design. When you juxtapose one image alongside another, and don't not like in film where you flash a bunch of images, but where you put them side by side or page after page, and you experience them in space and time. You put ideas together differently than if I notice how I have to use my hands to like describe the medium.
Those are not jazz hands.
Right, right. Comics hands, book hands. I'm not just using a paragraph of text. And I think the key thing, well, we'll get into some examples of comics. Maybe I'll point this out. But one of the key things is comics give us a way of reading and a way of taking in information that is based on choice, reader choice. And I mean, that's what young readers especially have grown up in, a world where they have to choose what to look at constantly because there's so many things coming at them at any moment. And comics give us a way. They're fun to draw, they're fun to read, but they give us a way to like train our attention to focus on something and put lots of pieces together and focus on the big picture too. So they're beyond just drawing projects. They're actually ways of thinking, I think.
So let's pivot to your series called The Civil War Diary of Freeman Colby.
Hmm.
Did you have just an interest in Civil War history, or what was the gestation of this idea?
This was it was kind of all my favorite projects are kind of accidental projects
Mhm.
that I don't think are projects when I start them, and then years later I look back and realize, oh, this is a book, isn't it? So this series, it's an ongoing series. I just finished drawing and I'm holding up volume 4 here. I've been drawing it for 13 years now. It will be 13 years at the end of the year, I guess. And so it takes me about 3 years to make each book. So when I started, if you had told me this is going to be a 13 plus year job, I'm not done. So it'll be more. And you'll be working at it in 2026. I would have just said, no way. That's crazy. I had just finished a book. It was a travel memoir book about living in Eastern Europe and collecting family stories and how those family stories connect to local and regional stories. And I came back from that. And as I was still finishing up that graphic novel, I just started looking around in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Vermont saying, I grew up here. Like, why don't I know more about the town I live in or where the people who settled this town came from in Massachusetts? There's stories here that I've just walked over all my life and ignored. And I think that's what travel sketchbooking and travel comics really taught me is I go somewhere where I need to learn the language. I don't know the lore. I start asking questions. I start learning. I come home. Why would I turn that off? Why don't I keep learning language and lore and ask questions and explore, So it really comes out of that. I went to a local historical society. I said, do you have anything interesting on? Oh, I don't know. How about Civil War history or Revolutionary War history or something like that, just to pick some eras I was mildly curious about. And out of one of these boxes, literally kind of tumbled out this diary that, well, here I have an example here. I'll put my little desktop camera on if I can. Let's try it. Whoops. Okay, so here's my desktop. A little photocopied, typed up transcript of a diary. This is actually a letter from later in the package of pages, but it was typed like this. And I started looking at it, and it said the Civil War Diary of Freeman Colby. And I just started reading, and it basically looked like this. And I started asking around. I got interested in this diary. It was about 30 some pages long, and I've marked these up. It wasn't marked up when I first saw it. And I started asking around, and nobody had ever read it before. So I just took the first couple sentences, the first paragraph really, and I drew out some little boxes on the page on a blank piece of paper. Just set a blank piece of paper next to it. I drew out some little squares and I started writing the words into the squares, just juxtaposing, putting them down on the page in different boxes. And then I sort of set a challenge to myself. What do I draw in each box to bring this text to life on the page? And the end result became, well, I'll show you volume 4 here. I don't have volume 1 within reach at the moment. It's on the shelf over there. But the end result became a little series of panels with the writing by Freeman Colby, who was a real person, who was a teacher from New Hampshire, from my hometown here. And these are his words that he wrote during the Civil War in his letters in this case. And then I draw pictures of the things and the people he's describing. And in order to figure out what that even looks like, what in this case June 1864 looked like in the Union Army, I have to do a lot of research. I have to go looking at the back of each book. I put some of my research materials. So I'll go find photographs of the places where he was.
Yeah.
I'll go find photographs of it. I actually don't have any photographs of the main characters, the diary writer Freeman Colby and his friend Jonas. But I do have photographs of, he was in the quartermaster corps. So I have photographs of quartermasters gathered after a hard day's work and with the bread and apparently some beverage and apparently some puppies they've collected here. So that gives me a sense of the life that he's describing and the people he's around in the places he visited. So when you look at page, in this case, 146, let's turn to 146, and you'll probably see where I get some ideas to fill in my panels. Well, there's lots of boxes. There's guys pouring beverages here. There's stacked up barrels of salt pork and stuff. That's all, you can see all that. Oh, they're sitting on hay bales here. But if you look back in this picture, they're taking a break on the barrels. So every little detail in these pictures becomes fair game for when I'm drawing the places and people and adventures that Freeman Colby describes in his letters. He doesn't really describe them in his letters. He just tells them. And then we get to see them in the artwork because of that research. So that's the whole project, like 13 years of going through the diaries and letters sentence by sentence, and then figuring out what that looked like. And I have to get creative too. Sometimes he describes things that there are no photographs of or no drawings of. But actually this page I pulled from a Winslow Homer painting that shows us the battlefields and actually shows a rebel soldier taunting the Union soldiers like this and what happens to that soldier. So that came from a painting, and then others come from photographs. And others come from drawings. There were lots of artists on the field drawing everything that happened. So it's been a really amazing project to whoops, let me stop the share there. It's been a really amazing project to say, what if I just pay close attention to this one primary source, the letters, and what does that lead me to? What does that lead us to in the pursuit of showing the story that's told here? Because it ends up being a project of taking lots of different sources and weaving them together so that the books come to life, so that the story makes sense. Because one person's story alone doesn't really make sense. Because one person, you write a letter about your day, you're an expert in what you want the story to be about your day, but you don't actually know all the forces at play on your day, especially not in the moment. And not even maybe 50 years later when you look back at it. We need other people's storytelling. We need other people's voices to make sense of our world. That's what it's taught me. And I guess that's why it's taken 13 plus years to get this partway through the series, because I'm taking my time and exploring it. And I want to honor the storytellers and really show their world.
So you're coming to Milton to give a concert and to conduct a workshop in which parents and children both invited to participate in this. Um, you're going to show them how to make a graphic story, let's put
Yeah.
it that way. And you're proposing that they use source material. They could do a history, like a history of the area, of Milton, of the
Mhm.
Forbes family, or whatever, what's based on the material that's there at the Forbes house. But
Mhm.
you're also going to propose that they do a personal history. So, uh, how do they go about doing that? Do they just talk to their folks, or do they maybe go by their own memories too? That's a way to get the story started, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that would be the memoir approach. Yeah, memory and history, we often confuse them, but in many ways they're kind of opposite projects, right? When I'm doing the research of history, I'm saying, I don't trust my memory. I want to look to the sources and figure out what the sources tell me and then analyze them and weave them together carefully. You can also, yeah, you can tell personal stories and say, I have friends who do memoir and they say, I'm not too concerned about the historical details. This is how I remember the story. And I'll say, like, well, did you interview all the people involved? No, no, this is a memoir. This is my telling of the story. Um, and you can approach it as an ethnographer too. You can say, well, this is how other people tell it, and I'm going to show their experience of it and get their perspective on this story uh, and document that. Yeah, there's so many different approaches. And just to be clear, it's not like we're doing the workshop and then meeting up 13 years from June, right? And saying, what do you got? We One of the things that enable us to make comics is giving ourselves a time limit. So the workshop, I believe it's an hour and a half, maybe two
Yeah.
hours. It's an afternoon workshop. We're not going to be there for 24 hours or 13 years. So the question becomes, okay, what can we get down in an hour and a half, or in 65 minutes by the time I stop talking and showing the formats and stuff and say, let's get to work. Um, and so that focuses us, and that's one of the things that comics does for me. When if you read a book or two, if you get interested in a subject and you read a couple historians or you read a couple books about it, oh my gosh, you've got so many ideas. How do you stop and how do you put them in order and how do you tell a story from that? Storytelling is not collecting all the data you can. You don't have a story if you collect all the data. That's just data collection. That's just like
Mhm.
digital devices do that well. But humans tell stories. That means we strip out the data. That means I look through those photographs and I don't try to copy the photograph and make a photorealistic artwork. Like, I have the photograph. But if I look at the photograph and say, what are the three details that are important to the story? I just draw those. That can take seconds. That can take a couple minutes. Do some editing, maybe it takes a couple more minutes. But that's a simpler, faster process. And that's where cartooning becomes a really powerful tool for storytelling in a historical setting. So what I usually do is I'm going to suggest a couple formats for people for our workshop. One of my favorite formats is the one sheet mini comic.
Mhm.
It's small. Every page is small and doable. It's really big enough to do like maybe one sentence and one little picture per page.
Mhm.
So it simplifies things. We have to approach it a little more like a picture book where it breathes more. You kind of turn the pages to see the next step. This is an 8-page book. It's an 8-page format. I'll show people how to make these. It's a single sheet of paper, fold it up. They can go on my site ahead of time and practice up if they want, but I will show people how to do it. Um, and then like if you asked me, if we weren't doing this interview, but you asked me to answer your questions by email, I would be really tempted not to type up my answers because I just type and type and type like I'm doing now. I talk and talk and talk. Said, here are my 10 questions, fit them in an 8-page comic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I could do that. And
Yeah.
that limit forces me to focus and forces me to say, like, what's my beginning? What's my middle? What's my end? Not that that's the only way to tell a story, but that's one way to tell a story that this book does really well. So I wouldn't even encourage people to try to finish by the end of the workshop. I bet somebody does. There's always someone who's like, I'm done, and they've got it. Sometimes it's a really beautiful, sometimes it's a start, sometimes it's a really beautiful, finished, simple piece, like a haiku comic. You could approach it as a haiku comic. You don't want to work on that for 6 months. You want to just get it down and be done with it. But I also will encourage people to think of the workshop as a starting point,
Mm.
and you might walk out of the workshop with a couple pages done in pencil. You might walk out of the workshop with a blank book and all these ideas, and then you go home and you see something that gives you a totally different idea, but you'll have that to draw into, or you'll know how to make another to draw into it. And I'm going to I'll be there working with some materials from the Forbes House collections. We'll have a couple sample materials for people to try. When people register, I want to also send them something in advance, encouraging them to bring anything they might want to make comics from,
Mm.
if we can do that. Because that's nice to know. Like if you have a family diary and you think it might make a good comic, maybe you want to bring it or bring copies. Maybe you don't want to walk around with the original. But yeah, and we'll have I think we'll have some visuals, we'll have some texts, and we'll have a bunch of simple art supplies. I basically just use pencils, felt tip pens, sometimes a marker. Will work in black and white. You can go color afterwards because I color a lot of my comics, like the covers and things, but I do the whole comic in black and white first because it's just simpler to read and it's simpler to draw. So we'll work in pencil. I'll show people the techniques I use to make the books, but you don't have to spend 3 years drawing a page a day. You can do it in an afternoon or take it home and work on it over the week.
I think what makes, what you do such a perfect fit for the Forbes House is, of course, the Civil War focus, but also the music. So I wanted to sort of pivot to what you're doing on Saturday, because I was noticing that you're not just doing a variety of 19th century music, but you're doing readings too. I mean, tell me about the show and how it's going to go.
Sure. Yeah. So the workshop is Sunday afternoon. And the night before, that Saturday night, it's the 13th.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, the 13th of June. I don't trust my memory. I have to go to my calendar source. Um, it's that Saturday in June, we'll have a Civil War concert. And I got into doing this with some friends. We used to do it as a band. Now we're all over the map. So I do the concerts usually just as a solo banjo player. Um, and the whole idea with the concert is that we want to experience the history in more dimensions than just the words, just
Mm.
talking about the history. And we started doing this for New Hampshire Humanities for their Humanities to Go shows, events, which a lot of them are like, say, professors who come and do a little lecture, maybe a little slideshow. And we started doing these as participatory musical events where we'd bring period instruments. I have a couple replica banjos I built, and they're in the 1840s, 1850s style. So they would have been around in the 1860s in the Civil War. And we first conceived it as, oh, we'll do a bunch of Civil War songs. But as we got into the music of the era, we realized how many different forms of music there were, focused on folk music, music that people who were untrained, unclassically trained or academically trained, non-professional musicians could play, and that people took with them into the experiences of the time.
That was one of the best elements of Ken Burns's series. The Civil
Mhm.
War was the music itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not like let's study the Civil War through the writings of all the professional poets and all the politicians. Ken Burns, he realized this years ago. Let's study this huge era through the people on the ground, through the words that they left behind, with the misspellings, with the ways they saw the world, with all their flaws and all the beautiful moments and all the terrible moments. Let's study that. And moreover, you don't have to survey every one of the millions of people involved. You need to carefully pick a couple sources that can hint at all those people. So, and I do that with the comics. We also do that with the music. So when you come to the show, usually I will, let me grab this. I'll be set up in the front, and then usually either on the seats or at a table as you come in, we'll have all these different cards. I'll usually have like a dozen of them in the show, and they have people on them that you may or may not recognize. And then we invite people to pick one of them and take them to your seat. And then when you look, like this one's a picture of Frederick Douglass, a young Frederick Douglass. And when you flip it over, there's a little quote from Frederick Douglass here. In this case, this one's from his 5th of July speech in 1852. And then there is a program, and usually we'll have a printed program, but it's actually easier if I don't rely on the audience to follow in the program. I'll just call on people. So I'll say, well, we'll do a song. It's all sing along. Often I put the lyrics up on the screen behind me, so you don't have to memorize anything. People back then could learn songs quickly and they could memorize verse after verse. That's a practice skill though, so I don't rely on that. So the program is it tends to be song, quote, song, quote, song, quote. And the fact that the quotes are coming from the audience members who have volunteered, who have picked, their character and then have a quote to read on their card. You don't have to memorize anything. You can listen closely to the music, sing it with us, participate as you want. And then every now and then an audience member stands up and reads. You can read dramatically or you can just read simply. But it gives us a way. I pick the quotes to have something to do to segue between songs. So we can do Uncle Sam's Farm, which is about the growing territory of the United States in the pre-Civil War years. And then we'll have I just saw this one, Judge Douglas, and a quote from the Lincoln-Douglas debates about, why cannot this union exist forever divided into free and slave states? He's arguing for state sovereignty and the ability to decide whether your state becomes free or slave. Mm-hmm. And then we'll do a song from that era, a song that calls that into question. Or the next quote might be a Lincoln quote that rebuts that. We put all these a dozen or so quotes, a dozen or so songs in this big conversation, and it's all in our voices, in the voices of the people in the room. We kind of accidentally decided on that because we were doing hour-long shows and our voices were getting really hoarse, and it was like it wasn't as interesting if we stand up and read quotes and then do a song and then read a quote. It's much more interesting if the audience is just part of the group and we're all bringing this to the room together.
So do you have a song in mind for each quote that you've passed out so that when the time comes to sing a song, you've got something at hand?
Well, we pick the songs ahead of time.
Uh-huh.
So I'll do, there's some songs, there's some great Civil War rally songs that really show the politics and the ethics and the values of the people involved in various fronts, in various dimensions of the conflict. And they really show us it's not North versus South. It's not free versus slave. These are all story constructs and mythologies that we impose on that history. But when you really listen to the songs and say, wait a minute, where does this song come from? It could be like, for instance, I mentioned Uncle Sam's Farm. That's a rewrite of a banjo tune that the Hutchinson family singers wrote new lyrics for. And who were they? They were from Milford, New Hampshire, and they later moved down to Massachusetts. So and they had a career and they had a reason they wrote that song at the time they did. And we'll do these songs and talk a little about where they came from, so we know that there's more to this conversation than just what the lyrics tell us. Mm-hmm. And then and we like to show period instruments too. So there's multiple dimensions. There's the words. There's the words involved that give us a lot of information. There's also the music that around the words impacts us emotionally or makes us experience the words differently. And then there's the instruments themselves, which are material evidence of the cultures involved. In the case of like I'm a banjo player, so I'm fascinated by these early banjos. This is one of them. This is a replica that I built from a Terry Bell replica kit. It's a Boucher 1856 banjo. So it's a replica of a banjo that would have been built in Baltimore in 1856. Beautiful, amazing instrument. They're so simple. It's like a single piece construction neck, basically a table leg,
Yeah.
merged with a drum, just basically a snare drum or something similar, and then some hardware attached to it, and no frets. So you don't have to measure and place the frets carefully, and you get a much more expressive playing tone. It's more vocal, and it's deeper than a lot of modern banjos.
What's with that? What's with that one string that's kind of on the outside there that has the
the short string, the high string. Yeah, that's what really that's one of the things that really makes the banjo different. That's there's a lot of history, a lot of historians have done a lot of work on this instrument because it's such a quintessentially American instrument in that it's a marriage of multiple continents and cultures.
Mm.
So you're seeing Western style musical instruments and furniture types of woodwork built by carpenters and woodworkers, but that's a clue that the instrument itself is based on a gourd-based instrument from Western Africa, because there are various instruments from Western Africa that have these shorter strings. You don't see them so much in European stringed instruments, but you do see them in Northern and Western African instruments. And then the playing style itself is not a guitar playing style at this point, at least. Later in the 1800s, it does become more classical. But the playing style is basically a West African Caribbean folk style using two fingers, and you strike down. So you're striking down, and then your thumb's right there on that string. So you get a double hit. And it's just that back and forth, tuppa, 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 and the syncopation that the patterns introduce into it. It's like Ed Emberley's cartooning, right? It's super simple, but then from that simplicity, infinite complexity can come. I don't know about infinite. As a banjo player, I'm not qualified to say that, but it's a folk instrument too. So you don't have to study for 10 years playing daily. It's meant to be a simple pattern of movements that you can make that reliably create something that make the people around you tap their toes or make the people around you want to dance, right? And or sing along or whatever, or to accompany song. So that's another dimension that we look at is I bring the instruments. So I'll show that. I have a chest of instruments that I bring along, but I also bring instruments. Not everybody's ready to pick up a banjo and try it. People are welcome to at the concert afterwards to try the banjos and things. But I'll also bring some folk instruments like, this is my favorite here, like a jawbone. And this is mentioned in several songs of the era. It's harder to find graphics of it. I don't know why though. But these are the kinds of instruments, the folk instruments that we can pass around and try out. And I always invite audience members to join the band so we can have a couple seats alongside the banjo. Mostly it's driven by our voices, but then if I'm playing the banjo and you want to pick up the jawbone and try a couple simple patterns on that, you can add a lot to the music. So we'll give people a chance to try that too. And the other dimension that I add to it is we always project artwork of the time. So as we sing, like that song I mentioned about territorial ambitions and the changing map of the United States, Well, we'll have a quote from Frederick Douglass. We'll have instruments that were carried over that land, that were transmitted by different cultures on that land. And then we can show some paintings of the landscapes or paintings of the people who were traveling over that land. And when we put all those pieces together, it's like with the comics, doing the research, finding 10 different ways of looking at it and then figuring out how to draw it in cartoons. It's like that with this. We find quotes, we find visuals, we find musical instruments, we bring them all together and we enact the song together. We sing the song together, and it gives us like an embodied feeling of that history that you don't get just from reading a book about it.
Mhm.
Because all this music was meant to be sung together, to gather and sing together. So it's just it's a living history in a way.
Well, Marek, it's been good talking to you, and boy, you've really whetted our appetite for this weekend. You'll definitely see me at both events, and I hope other people watching this program will at least take in one of the events. Once again, June 13th and 14th, Saturday and Sunday. Marek, thanks for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I
And
will see you at Forbes House.
okay, very good. Bye.
Yeah.
Marek Bennett appears at the Forbes House Museum on Saturday and Sunday, June 13th and 14th. The Saturday appearance is called Folk Music from the American Civil War. On Sunday, he conducts a workshop on using cartoons to tell local or personal histories. Tickets for both events are available at the Forbes House website. Both programs are funded in part by the New England Foundation for the Arts. I hope to see you there. This is Jeff Stoodt reminding you to remember, everyone has got to have art.